We've got a number of things on the agenda today, so best get started as quickly as we can. So first of all, can I remind everybody that these proceedings will be recorded, and it's delayed recording, and they'll be available on the council website in a while. Okay, so do we have any declarations of interest from members? I'm not seeing everybody, but please remember it's quite difficult for me to see what's up on the screen from here. Can you see any?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Sorry, there is no declarations of interest this morning. However, if you would prefer, I will call the sedierant first, Chair, please.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, good morning, members. In terms of the sedierant, if you hear your name, could you confirm your attendance, please? We have an apology this morning from Councillor Roberts. Councillor Jenkins.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Friel.
Good morning, Lynn. I'm here.
Councillor McFadden.
Lynn, he's having some problems trying to log on this morning.
Thanks, Councillor Cook. I'll watch out for him joining. Councillor Mackay.
Present, Lynn.
Councillor Cook.
Yeah, here, Lynn.
Councillor Maitland.
Councillor Maitland's going to be a wee bit late, but she's coming in.
Thanks, Councillor Todd. Councillor Todd.
Here, Lynn.
Councillor Mayor.
Yep.
We have an apology from Councillor McGee. Councillor Crawford.
Here, Lynn.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Bell.
Yeah.
And Councillor Filson. Councillor Filson. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Lynn. So just so we get things in the right order, no declaration of interest, is that correct? Okay, thank you. So, folks, just before we go forward here, we have a hearing this morning, and it's the second item, or it's item number 4 on your agenda. So if everyone on the committee is happy with that, I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to move that application to the very first one, then we can have the hearing, and then the participants can either stay or go as they so wish. So do we have any objections to that? No objections? Okay, thank you. That's what we'll do. So we'll proceed to the hearing, which is item number 4 on your agenda. The planning application number 210702 PP, erection of dwelling house and land at Middleton of Fullwood, C108 Stewarton, Cabrock Hill, from B796 near Stewarton to Renfrewshire boundary, near Longlock, Renfrewshire, Dunlop, Culm Manor, East Ayrshire, KA35JZ, and it's pages 50 to 78 on your papers. And Lynn, do you want to take us through the hearing procedure first? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The hearing will begin with the Chief Governance Officer or his representative giving an overview of the application. The objectors will then present their objections to the committee. Members of the committee may ask questions of the objectors on their submissions made. Members, please note that this is not to be taken as an opportunity to comment on the merits or otherwise of the planning application. The applicant and/or their agents will then address the committee. And again, members have the opportunity to ask questions on the submissions made. Again, members, please note that this is not to be taken as an opportunity to comment on the merits or otherwise of the planning application. At this stage, the hearing will then close. Following that, representatives from the various departments here today will give an overview, will provide clarification on any matters which have been raised during the hearing, and the members will then move to determination. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. So, Fiona, are you taking us through this? Oh, David. Okay, David, thank you. If you want to just take us through the application, please.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning.
The purpose of this report is to present a planning application for a single dwelling for determination by the Planning Committee, which under the Council's scheme of delegation requires to be determined by Planning Committee as the application has attracted more than 10 objections. The application site is located within a cluster of dwellings known as Fullwood, approximately 2 miles east of Dunlop. The site is an undeveloped area of land, grassed, and is currently being used as a small orchard. The application proposes a single dwelling, 1.5 stories in height, as detailed at paragraph 4 on page 51 of the papers. A summary of the consultation responses undertaken are listed in the report, starting at page 51, noting that no consultee raises any objection subject to planning conditions. With regard to third-party representations, 12 representations were received as set out from page 53 of the papers. Representations cover matters regarding the principle of the development, character of the area, design, roads and access. An assessment against the development plan is provided on pages 55 to 67 of the papers, and material considerations are set out on pages 67 to 70. I'll now take members through some slides. So if you bear with me, I'll share the screen here. Okay. The first slide that members see there is just a rural location plan showing the location of the development to the east of Dunlop. This is the site plan showing the cluster of properties. The dwelling is the orange shaded in the middle there, and the red line application site surrounding that, with the red line site coming out on either side to account for the sight lines at the site junction. And this is an overview of the cluster itself. The properties there are listed. We note that there's 7 existing dwellings. And there's also 2 consented dwellings which are located in the west of the cluster. Those are both live planning consents. As members will have perhaps noted in the papers, the relevant key policy here is Res 5, which allows up to a 50% addition to an existing cluster. So this would represent the 3rd house to be added to the 7 that are in existence. The elevations of the proposed house, you note here it's 1.5 storey. The materials are listed there, and we also have a planning condition looking for the details of those materials to be approved if members were to grant consent. And the floor plans of the dwelling. And this is an extract from the local development plan, just showing the location. And that's obviously in the northern part of the district and the rural diversification area where policy Res 5 applies. Now some photographs of the site. So this is standing just at the northern part of the site, looking down the site. Just off to the side of that again, also looking into the site. And again to the other side, looking towards the agricultural shed that's in existence there and shown on the plans. That is the neighbouring property, which is Mid Fullwood to the west. And that's from the site looking back up towards the public road. You can see there the other dwelling, which is on the east of the site, is Midtown of Fullwood Cottage. There is a consent in place to replace that house with a new dwelling, but that consent hasn't been implemented as of today's date. And just a few detailed shots looking across at the neighbouring property, what would be the neighbouring property, and again to the other side, looking across to where the new proposed dwelling would be, and again up towards that. More kind of panoramic shot, just looking to the south of the site, noting that it's predominantly agricultural in this area. So some shots just where the access would be taken. So this is looking to the west and to the east. And just the site looking towards the site. See at the moment there's trees just at the front of the site, as well as a fairly mature hedge again, that's the property that has consent to be replaced with a new dwelling. And again, the existing dwelling on the other side. I'll just stop sharing for a second. Conclusions are drawn on pages 71 and 72 of the papers, noting that the development is considered to be compliant overall with the development plan. Principally, this includes policy Res 5, which allows for a 50% addition to existing clusters of dwellings in the rural diversification area from the time of adoption of the development plan. Capacity under this policy remains for one dwelling, and given its central location within the cluster, it's considered to be a gap site rather than a linear expansion of the cluster. Other than the representations, no material consideration indicates that the application should be refused, and whilst noted, the representations are not considered to be of sufficient weight or merit to outweigh the compliant development plan position. As such, the application is recommended for approval with conditions as set out in paragraph 2 on page 50 of the papers. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Now, folks, this is a hearing, so we have two objectors who wish to speak on behalf of themselves and of others. Now, the first I have on my list is Mr. Marcus Noble. Now, Mr. Noble, we're going to give you 10 minutes, okay, should you require it. If you get to 9 minutes, I warn you, you've got 1 minute to go, and I'm afraid we're quite strict, so I will stop you at 10 minutes, okay?
I'm hoping not to take 10 minutes. I don't think.
Well, yeah, that's up to you, sir, but you go ahead. You've got 10 minutes.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, members. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to speak. I have a number of things to point out here. First, that your constituents in Fullwood are unanimous in their objection to this this rather crude plan. Second, I disagree with your findings. My architects also disagree, and we've had a second opinion, and they also disagree. This planning application is in direct contravention of the overreaching policy OP1, which states that it should be fully compatible with the surrounding established uses and have no unacceptable impacts on the environment and quality of the area. This development is in direct contravention of this, David. Also, that the size, scale and layout and design enhances the character and the amenity of the area and creates a clear sense of place. This house is completely different from the other houses that are there, except for the one house that it is an extension of that is built directly beside, which, in our opinion, should probably not have been built in the first place. But the materials used in this house, its location, is in direct contravention of policy OP1. The second point here that we have is that the proposal is in keeping with Res 1, which is again an overarching policy. The justification for Res 1 is a gap, an infill. This is not a gap or an infill. This is someone's garden. It is not a gap site, and this is in direct contravention of Res 1. Now, we have taken a second opinion on this, Mr. Chair, and it is in contravention of Res 1. So these policies are in place for a good reason, and the reason is to stop this type of development. While we were talking, and I did look at the papers, there are 7 properties there. There are not. So that is, again, I think making mistakes at this time of COVID is something which unfortunately does happen. But there are not 7 properties there. In fact, I stay in one, which you've noted to be 2. The second property that you've noted as a dwelling is actually a buyer. I have taken some photographs of said buyer, if you want to take a look at them. But I've been living there since 2005, and I can assure you that it is indeed a buyer. It did have cows living in it at some stage or another, and as such, I would not be able to have humans living in such a property. I think that's probably enough for the committee to consider. You know, we are vehemently opposed, as all your constituents are, to this development. And you will note there are other objections from constituents out with Fullwood. These are walkers. These are people who cycle past. This is a beautiful part of the countryside, and this house would certainly not be in keeping with that. Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, could you just stay there, because the members of the panel may have some questions for you, just to clarify. And can I just remind everybody, at this stage, it is simply to clarify Mr. Noble's objections. Can I just jump in first, Mr. Noble?
Thank you.
And you mentioned my constituents. You said your constituents. I don't know if you meant me personally.
I didn't. I meant.
Or whether as a general. I was going to say, because this is within my this is my constituency,
well, it is.
And I just have to make sure everybody understands that I have to make up my mind on how I vote based on what I hear today and what's in the papers, and nothing to do with my constituents as they are. Okay, but I take it you didn't mean me personally, so that's fine. You were talking in general.
Mean you personally.
Okay, I'll hand over to the rest of the committee then. Do we have any questions for clarification from Mr. Noble? Councillor Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. I think the basic question is, how many houses are there? I was wondering if the planners could put up the drawing with the houses numbered, and we could ask the objector to clarify. Thank you.
Certainly.
Yes, if that's technically possible. I don't see why not, because you are asking a question of the objector. Yeah.
So, thanks, Chair. If I might, could we ask the objector to just comment, is number 1, is that a house?
Mr. Mayor, I'm afraid it's my old eyes.
Yeah.
I can't quite.
Yeah. Hang on,
I could probably step.
We'll find a way to sort this. We don't. There in your paper on page 78. Is there not a diagram of the houses? Perhaps you could speak to that, because we should all have a picture. That picture there, is that sufficient for your needs, Mr. Noble? When you can find it.
Right. Okay. They are not, Mr. Mayor. I'm afraid to say they're not numbered from 1 to 7 in the paper I have in front of me. Not that I can see. But shall I proceed from?
Yeah, from left to right, or right to left.
I'll proceed from left to right. That is from town end of Fullwood to High Fullwood. Okay, so let's take town end of Fullwood as being 1. Town end of Fullwood is indeed a house. I confirm that. The second house that we reach as we go from left to right is Mid Fullwood. Mid Fullwood is a house. As we go up, we see mid to Fullwood and something called the Flat, the Buyer. That is 1 house, not 2 houses. I can confirm this, as this is my house. So it's only 1 house. It seems to me that this is counted as perhaps 2 or 3 houses. I can't tell, David. Have you counted it as 2 or 3?
We'll let David come in once you're finished, sir. Okay.
Okay. It is 1. It is 1 house. We then proceed to the orange house, which is the proposed development. It is not a house yet. We move then, as we proceed to the right, we see a property called Midton of Fullwood Cottage. This is a derelict cottage. We would not consider this to be a house. There is a planning application which we have not objected to for this derelict building, and it will become a house. But we would contend that it is not yet a house. It is a derelict building and has been so for certainly all the time I've lived there. That is 15 years. Moving to the right, we have one other property on this schematic, and that is High Fullwood. I can confirm to the members that High Fullwood is indeed a house. So as we count this, and pardon my education, I count 1, 2, 3, 4 houses, not 7. I count 4.
The grey space marked sheep shed, is that just a sheep shed?
That is indeed a sheep shed and not a house.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
so, but I think what we're looking at are 4 existing houses and plans for 3, which would make up the 7. I don't want to put words into David Wilson's mouth, but I think that's what we're. That's the planner's situation.
Yes, George. Well, as you say, I think we're going to let David answer that one for himself. But just so we keep everything in order, I'm going to ask if there's any more questions for Mr. Noble for clarification at this time, and David can come in at the end. Okay, David, and I noticed there was a fair bit of conversation going on while Mr. Noble was speaking. If you need 5 minutes to sort out an answer, then just ask and we'll give that to you once we've heard all the objections, okay? Okay, right. So do we have any more questions for clarification for Mr. Noble? Councillor Todd.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Mr. Noble, for going through that. That's helped me as well. Identifying the houses. Thanks for that. Can I ask, in terms of your, and this is where I need clarification, in terms of your, I listened to your objections, but the specific one about the style of the house, is that an objection?
Indeed it is. Yes, indeed. These policies are in place, Councillor Todd, for a reason. You know, and the style of the house is completely different from every other house in the area, and you do get from the photographs that David has taken. This is a rural area. This house has no place in a rural area of such. Now there is a house beside this which did get through planning and is similar to this, so I do take that point, David. But one house that looks, I'm sorry to say this, but one house that does not look very nice doesn't mean you can build 2 houses that don't look very nice and are completely out of keeping, Councillor Todd, with the area. Completely, it's a rural area, as can be seen from the photographs. This is a very modern house, as you can also see from the photographs.
No, thank you very much. And also the second part was that you are asserting that this is not a gap site, it is part of a garden from an existing house.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely laughable to say that this is a gap infill. You know, there is another policy that says that you shouldn't have houses that are all in a line like this as a tunnelling effect. You know, and we raised that in our first letter of objection, but it's not a gap.
Thanks, Mr. Noble. What house does the orchard belong to at the moment?
The house belongs, the orchard at the moment belongs to the existing house that this has been built beside as part of their garden. And it is, and as can be seen from the photographs, it is not an orchard. Some small trees, saplings have been planted recently in this garden. So it is, to call it an orchard would kind of be stretching it, I would say.
So is it joined the garden part of Midton or Fullwood?
The gap is a part of what they call mid-Fullwood.
Mid-Fullwood, thank you.
Mid-Fullwood.
No,
This
that's
is gap
clear.
in part of
Thank you very
mid-Fullwood.
much. I'm finished. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Todd.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Noble? Okay, I don't see any. Mr. Noble, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I just say you've certainly done your homework. It's unusual for objectors to come along and actually quote the policies to us. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes we get emotional appeals. But you've stuck to the thing and gone through the policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, members.
Chair, I wonder if it may also help members, sorry, Mr. Noble, while you're there, to assist, inform their decision making. I think, Mr. Noble, you mentioned there you live at Midton of Fullwood.
Yes.
And on the map that was up on the screen there was a property, I think, immediately behind your home.
That's my buyer.
That was referred to as the flat or the buyer, and it was just to clarify from your perspective, what is its use?
It is a buyer. It's not used for cows anymore. I have taken some photographs. It's being used for storage.
Right. So it's not used as a flat?
Oh, no.
Or for domestic residential purposes?
No.
Thank you.
No.
I just thought it might be assist members just to get that further clarification.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Mr. Noble.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Mr. John Crawford. Do you want to come forward, John? Thank you. Mr. Crawford, just the same thing. You have 10 minutes, and if you get to 9, I will warn you. You've got 1 minute to go. Okay. Thank you very much. And again, once you're finished, the panel will be able to ask you questions for clarification. Okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Fortunately, Marcus has covered all the planning stuff with all the numbers against it that helps you. I hope my appeal is not, or objections are not to be too emotional, but there are issues that you need to consider about my comments in relation to what Fullwood is as a place to live. What I'll be covering in what I say is a description of Fullwood and the proposed changes, giving a voice to the strength of the opposition to this build, and highlighting traffic issues and offering a potential solution for them in relation to this one planning application, if it goes through. I moved into Highfield. It would actually maybe be helpful to people to have the map that you had up before, David, to put that up just now. That might help me with what I'm saying.
If we can do that, that would be helpful. Thank you. Although remember, we do have pictures here, right, or a diagram here right in front of us.
But it helps me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. I live in Highfield Farm, which is the building on the right-hand side of the map. Cheers. When we moved into that building in August 2011, there were 3 houses in Fullwood. There was Highfield Farm, where we stay. There was the house where Mr. Noble stays, and there was the house at the far end, town end of Fullwood. And there were 3 houses and a derelict bungalow. Now, that bungalow has been derelict for about 16 years. Over the time we have been there, one house has been built, which is the donor house to the application that is being considered today. And that actually is quite out of keeping with the other 3 houses in the area, as Mr. Noble had suggested. Like I said, the bungalow has been derelict since we've gone in, and one of the things that I think is actually important to consider is that I think it's a wee bit disingenuous to include a derelict bungalow, which by your own report is called derelict, and by previous reports has been called uninhabitable, as one of the houses that currently exist. It is a lie. It's a planning consent at the moment, is my understanding of the status of it. Fullwood is a small cluster of houses that's about 200 metres in length. There are currently 4 houses there. Each of them have got substantial gardens surrounding them. And that is actually part of the charm of where we stay. By including this new house, actually what happens is so we're almost moving towards a suburban type of building and creating a suburban type of atmosphere within a small cluster of houses that were distinctly rural, certainly in 2011. Sorry, I've just lost my place for a second. Marcus covered the point that, in fact, where he lives at Midtown of Fulwood, it's only 1 house and not 2. And I'm suggesting that actually the derelict bungalow should not be included as a house. It's actually derelict. And whilst there's planning permission for building to go on there, and we all welcome that, I think it's important to highlight that. This new building changes completely. And if you look at the plans that are put forward, it's been suggested, in fact, it will be 10 metres from the derelict bungalow when it is built, or the property of the derelict bungalow when it's built. There's no other house that's close to any of the other houses in the small cluster. And it's changing the nature of where we live. One of the interesting things from the application and the responses from the local people is there has been an overwhelming opposition to this. There have been 12 objections and none in support. This hasn't happened to any of the other planning permissions that have been sought. Yes, there have been objections to different parts of it, so mostly to do with how high it is or what materials are being used, etc. But the bottom line is there's an overwhelming view from the people who live in and around Fulwood to this building being built. Out of the 4 houses in Fulwood, 3 of them have completely objected to it. So 3/4 of the houses that constitute Fulwood at the current time are objecting to it, and the only ones that are supporting it is the donor house, which is mid Fulwood. One of the things that certainly is causing concern for the people in Fulwood as we discuss the issues to do with the building of houses and the number of properties there, is the fact that on top of the houses that we currently have, there are 4 current planning permissions or applications there. Over and above the current houses, the 4 houses, that's doubling what we have. Now, I'm not counting the derelict bungalow in that because I don't believe it should be. There have been objections from surrounding farms and surrounding houses to it being built, and some of that will come on to later because I want to talk about the traffic management plan if this goes through. But within a 200-metre stretch, the proposals are that over a period of time, if this is approved, there'll be 4 new properties within Fulwood. Now that is way over the 50% that's indicated in the planning guidance, and we believe it's completely unacceptable. Having read the paper, one of the things that stood out for me is that how do people who live in small communities like this put an argument forward when, one, there is no delineation around where we live? Because what we're creating is both a linear or ribbon development, because 2 of those houses extend Fulwood, and filling a small gap here between one derelict property and another property. You're actually creating and developing and enhancing the whole idea of ribbon development, and we don't believe that is the right thing to do. It's a rural community, and we welcome the fact that actually people have living space and garden space that is probably bigger than suburban areas. I would fully accept. My third point was to do with the traffic and the traffic management plan. I understand there will be a traffic management plan drawn up. It will be signed off here as part of the planning committee. But with 4 developments within 200 metres on roads that actually have been indicated within the report that potentially they're not suitable for construction traffic, The potential is we're going to have 4 different developments happening, either at one time or sequentially, which means it stretches out over a far longer period of time for the people that live there. And I would suggest that you might want to consider that in your thoughts. It is a busy road. 3 times a year, the silage is cut. That means that tractors are going past the front of the house every minute and a half to 2 minutes throughout the day from dawn to dusk. That's the nature of living in a farm community. So to bring in large lorries to reverse and move and whatever, it is actually going to jam the whole area up. Over on top of that, from April through to October, where we stay at the right-hand side of Fulwood, there are at least 50 cows that come up first thing in the morning, go back down at, later in the evening. By first thing in the morning, I mean, kind of 9 o'clock in the morning, and about 5:30 in the evening, they're taken back out again. So there is continuous work going on in the area in which we live. For my wife and I, who stay in High Fulwood Farm, one of the major issues, and we know this from previous experience of the house that has been built, we stay on the junction of Harelaw Road and an unadopted road that goes off. And what has happened in the previous build is that the heavy goods vehicles have used that as their turning point. They use that to reverse down the unadopted road and go back out of it. And the unadopted road is looked after by the people that live along the road, and we do that.
1 minute, Mr.
Yes.
Crawford, okay?
Thank you very much. So the previous experience from outside our house is that it becomes busy, it becomes noisy, and it's actually intruding on a daily, regular basis throughout that. My one suggestion to you is that maybe the donor house, if you decide for this to go ahead, who has got a 2-gate entry and a tarmac forecourt, can allow the lorries to go in one gate and turn and go back out that gate to facilitate, if you agree to pass this, which I hope you won't, to facilitate the build of the new house. And maybe they might do that for the others. In conclusion, it appears, having read the documents, that there is a balance in favour of the applicant as opposed to the objectors, in that the applicant can go to appeal, which we cannot do so under the rules, I understand. This is our chance today. And I would therefore ask you to consider that. And the final point I would like to make is that the head of governance, or the chief governance officer, has included a warning at the end of the papers that you have in front of you today, where if you choose to ignore his result, that the council may face costs of if the applicant decides to go to appeal. That weights it, as far as I'm concerned, against those that are objecting to it, because we are not able to do that. And it's begging the question of money in relation to the council, and I understand how important that is, because I worked for the health service for over 30 years. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Crawford, thank you very much. And thank you for, as it were, giving us the other side of the objections. Can I just say that line that you're referring to about the cost that the council may occur, can I say that goes in almost everyone. It's a standard thing. Yep. And I can assure you the committee usually ignore it when they come to make a decision. Okay, much to the chief officer's chagrin, if that's the right word. But I assure you we don't take that into consideration. We do what we think's right.
Thank you for that reassurance.
Thank you. So, fellow committee members, do you have questions for Mr. Crawford for clarification at this time? Okay, we don't have any. Thank you very much, Mr. Crawford. Thank you. So next we have the agents for the applicant. Is it Mr. Steve McGee from LAM Architects? Is that correct? Yes?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Steve. The objectors have had 10 minutes each, so I think we're going to allow you 20. 15, Chair. So 15 minutes. Is that okay?
That's okay, Chair.
That's fine. And just the same as others. Well, you're 15 if you want them, but just the same as others. When you're 1 minute to go, I'll warn you. You've got 1 minute to go. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to take up much of your time. I know you're busy and things like that, but I just want to say a few things. The design proposals have been subject to extensive dialogue with the planning officials during the pre-application and application stages. I mean, I'll leave David to refer to respond to the question of number of dwellings in the cluster. But all technical and design issues have been resolved, and the planning officials have confirmed that they accord with the policies set out in the local plan. These are fully documented in the committee report. Therefore, I refer the elected members to the report, in particular to the recommendation to approve this application. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McGee. Sorry, you've taken me a bit by surprise. I thought you might take longer than that. Panel members, do you have any questions here for the applicant's representative? I'm not seeing any. No. Okay then. Well, in that case, thank you. Thank you very much. David, are you in a position to respond now, or do you want a couple of minutes?
No, Chair. I'm quite happy to
Happy
come
to go
back
ahead.
that if you're ready for that.
Yes, I believe we are. Yes.
Yep.
Super. If you bear with me, obviously the key one I want to touch on here is just the number of houses. So I'm just going to share the screen again and just talk members through what our thoughts are on the house numbers. Okay, so Mr. Noble's obviously set out that he thinks we've calculated that wrong in terms of we've set out that we believe there was 7 properties in the cluster. We've taken that number, having looked at the planning history. So the key disagreement seems to be around about properties 3 and 4 there, which we've got listed as Midtown of Fullwood and the buyer. Mr. Noble sets out that that's only 1 property in practice. So the reason we've listed that as 2 is that there is planning history where there was a planning approval for a conversion or a subdivision in there to a flatted property. Now, that may have reverted over time, and I'm quite happy to take Mr. Noble's word that at the moment that's a single property. That's absolutely fine. So that perhaps explains why we've listed that as 2 properties. Now, if we've got that wrong, I do apologise. However, in terms of the key test of the policy Res 5, it is a 50% of an existing cluster. So if that drops 1 property down, there was still 6 properties in the cluster. So in terms of the assessment that we've carried out, it would still remain compliant with the key policy. Now, I will come on and touch about the Midtown of Fullwood Cottage, the derelict property, and give a view on that as well. But if we are wrong with 7 properties and we drop that to 6, the position set out in your papers remains as we have explained it, and I believe that the policy is still compliant. There is 6 properties on the basis of what Mr. Noble's advised us. That means that a 50% extension of the existing cluster under policy Res 5 allows for 3 dwellings to be added. 2 dwellings have been consented as shown outlined in blue and in green on your screen at the moment, and there still remains capacity for 1 additional dwelling to be added to this cluster. So in my view, this development remains compliant with policy Res 5, whether it was 6 houses or whether it's 7 houses. So hopefully that provides a bit of clarity there, and I think other than recognising that it may be 6, I'm quite happy with the assessment. Otherwise, it's been carried out. I think it remains accurate in terms of our assessment of the potential to extend this cluster. So I don't change position from what's in the papers in that regard in terms of the assessment. It's probably expedient just to turn to the Midtown of Fullwood cottage that was described as being derelict. It is derelict, however, it does still remain, in terms of a use, a property. It is a dwelling house, and there would be no planning consent required if someone wanted to occupy that property. Now, whether it's derelict and capable of proper occupation would be for the owner to sort that out, but as a planning use, it remains a dwelling house, and we have consented a replacement dwelling house out with policy Reds 5. It's a straight replacement house, so regardless of whether it's derelict at the moment and will be replaced at some point, I believe that property counts towards those 6 in terms of its planning use as a dwelling, and therefore counts towards the 6 properties that this cluster remains, that this cluster has in total. I'll also now just touch on some of the design kind of comments that have been made about the kind of traditional nature of the cluster and the various properties, other than I think perhaps it's conceded by objectors that Mid Fullwood is perhaps of a slightly more modern design. I would at this point be quite content to still advocate that the property that is proposed is compliant with our rural policies. That is set out at paragraph 40 of the papers. It's 1.5 stories. The materials are largely quite a common palette for the rural area. There are interlocking grey tiles proposed, but that's something that we can pick up through the planning condition that we've proposed about the palette of materials to come in front of officers for approval, recognising that it's a predominant of slate or slate effect tiles, that probably interlocking concrete tiles is not something that we would support, and we would pick that up through those conditions. It's also worth noting that the 3 consents that are in place, all of which I've touched on, so there's the 2 in the west. One of them is in principle, so there's no design details at the moment. But the one listed on your screen is 210090 PP, which is outlined in blue. That is a single-storey property, and that's got a mixed palette of materials, including larch cladding, which is becoming a more common material. So that in itself moves away from the kind of more traditional stone-type buildings. And also the replacement house for Midton of Fullwood Cottage, that in itself is a more modern design, I would contend. That is a 1- and 2-storey dwelling finished in a smooth cement render and natural slate. So there is no absolute set style or palette of materials when the consents are taken into account. I would still be quite content to say that this house is a reasonable design for a rural area, and it's got a reasonable palette of materials. It doesn't present any unacceptable impacts on neighbouring properties through overlooking or overshadowing, and it sits nestled into what is the middle of the cluster, which is what I believe has been shown on the documents that's been in front of members today. So those were the kind of key points on that. There was also some discussion just about whether this is actually a garden or an orchard. I would ask members just to look at the screen at the moment. I would classify the garden of Mid Fullwood as the kind of shaded yellow area for that property. This may be in the ownership and maybe a kind of semi-formal use as a garden, but it's not recognised formally as a garden by the planning authority. So it is a gap site in the middle of the cluster, which is essentially perhaps semi-garden, but also it could just be described as agricultural use. So we don't classify that as a garden. Finally, and Karen might want to come in a bit more just on the impacts on the road, but just to touch on that, if it was approved, and we are looking for a traffic management plan through the planning conditions, that would be considered under delegated powers. I think there was a reference to that coming back to committee, but it would be delegated powers that any such condition was dealt with. And just noting that there is no objections from ARA. It is a small cluster, but it is a single dwelling house, and even with the other dwellings, it's probably unlikely that they would all be constructed at the same time, but that the planning history has been taken into account by officers, and would be aware, ARA would be aware of that as well as given when we're given his advice. So I'm quite happy to finish at that and offer any further clarification that any members might have, but hopefully that sets out a clear position.
Okay, Kerr, do you want to come in you're ready to come in at this stage and tell us a bit about the traffic management?
If you wish, Chair, yes.
Yeah, I think so. And then members can ask their questions of David or of yourself as we go along. Have we taken into we don't normally have a difficulty with cows coming along the road and these things. So and I mean this seriously. Have we taken that, or can that be taken into consideration, because it is a legitimate use of the road?
No, thank you, Chair. Well, yes. I mean, as an unclassified rural road, that's the sort of hazards you might expect on such roads. I mean, comment was made to the agricultural operations as well, and certainly when it is silage season or whatever, there will be additional traffic movements, tractor movements on the road. But overall, we consider that it was a fairly typical rural unclassified road. It is single track in nature, and it is relatively narrow through Fullwood, through the cluster. But as you move to the west, within about 200 yards or so, it's the U33 Woodhead Road we're talking about here. It actually widens out a bit. It's still notionally single track, but it does widen out to typically 3.5 to 4 metres, and does allow traffic to pass, two-way traffic movements to pass. And then it's within, about 900 metres of the C7 road, the Dunlop to Neilston Road, which, although classified as a C-class road, is actually a full two-lane carriageway. So it is with the settlement is within close proximity to a decent quality road network. So what was important for us was to ensure the safety of the access for the proposed dwelling. And members will see in the papers that there is a requirement there, and it's in the plans, to provide an appropriate sightline visibility display at the entrance, which can be achieved within the road boundaries there. So that's a condition, a proposed condition of any consent issued, and as will there be a service lay-by formed at that access point to allow a service vehicle to pull off the road there, so as not to cause an obstruction through traffic. And in terms of the construction phase, we have actually recommended a condition there. It's proposed condition number 13 for a construction traffic management plan to be brought forward for approval. And that will pick up on things like the routes, what would be prohibited routes, hours of deliveries, and so on and so forth, and conditioning it to any parking associated with the construction of the house would be totally off the public road. So we feel that with those proposed conditions that the impact of the construction can be mitigated, Chair, and that the proposed house itself wouldn't cause any undue additional stress on the local road network. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So, committee members, this is your chance for clarification. Can we get questions for the officers for clarification, please? Councillor Mackay.
Thank you very much, Chair. David, I wonder if you could give me some assistance, please. You have focused on Res 5 as what you ascertain as the key policy here. One of the objectors, I think it was Mr. Noble, particularly highlighted OP1 and Res 1, please. Could you give me some outline as to why the variance between what the objectors are putting forward and what you have highlighted to us? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Councillor. I'll touch on OP1 first. There is an assessment and the papers under OP1 starting at paragraph 41 of the papers. So we have set out there why we believe it's compliant with policy OP1. So that's already there. And in relation to Res 1, I'm just having a quick glance at it now, but I believe the fact it's not actually listed as a policy, it's probably not particularly relevant to this development. I'm just looking, I know that there was some reference to about gap infill or other redevelopment sites. That in relation to policy Res 1, that's within settlement boundaries. So in terms of this development, the key housing policy is Res 5, which is listed as housing in the rural diversification area, which is where this application site is located. So that's why it's focused on Res 5. I think that's the principal residential policy for the principle of this development. And OP1 is obviously there as well as the overarching policy. It's the frequent one that is in most reports, is relevant to most developments. And we think for the reasons in the papers that it's compliant with both of those policies.
Councillor Mackay, do you want to come back on that one?
Thank you. I do. Thank you very much, Chair. Again, an argument was put forward again by Mr. Noble that he had two different opinions, and the two different opinions had stressed to himself, and I presume the other objectors, that OP1 was not fully compatible in relation to this application. Again, David, I'm just further giving you an opportunity if there's anything else that you wish to highlight to us to help us with drawing to a conclusion here.
No problem, Councillor. What I'll maybe just do then is if your Chair's discretion, I'll take you through OP1 and what we've said. Obviously, we have set out at paragraph 41 responses.
I think, David, what you need to do is take us through that. I don't think we'll get an answer to Councillor Mackay's question if we just say it's in paragraph 41. I think you need to expand on that and say why you think the case is as you think.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm quite happy to do that. So, in terms of complying with the provisions and principles of the LDP vision and spatial strategy, relevant LD policies and associated supplementary guidance, we refer to the assessment that's previously been set out above, which is all the relevant policies and supplementary guidance, noting that there is, in our view, no incompatibility with any of those policies, and we do focus primarily on Res 5 as the principal residential policy. Part 2 of OP1 is fully compatible with surrounding established uses and have no unacceptable impacts on the environmental quality of the area. We've obviously put a response there. Just as an overview, this is a cluster of existing dwellings in the countryside. So adding one further dwelling to that is not out of place. The cluster policy exists to allow expansions of these small clusters of dwellings, and we've found no unacceptable impacts on the environmental quality of the area. There are no unacceptable impacts on neighbouring properties, on the road network, or on the general environmental quality of the area, subject to control through planning conditions. We then go on about to part 3, ensure that the size, scale, layout and design enhances the character and amenity of the area and creates a clear sense of place. We've set out here about the location of the dwelling. You'll have seen the plans that we put up. It's a 1.5 storey dwelling. We believe it largely complies with the supplementary guidance for housing in the countryside, for the design grounds and for the materials, albeit we would perhaps look to control some of the materials to the planning condition, as I touched on earlier. Where possible, reuse vacant previously developed land in preference to greenfield land. The site is greenfield, but there is no obvious vacant previously developed land as an alternative, so it's not incompatible with that part of the policy. You have the highest quality design by meeting with the provisions of Scottish planning policy, Scottish Government's policy statement designing streets, the Council's design guidance and any master plan design brief prepared for the site. As mentioned and touched on previously, we believe it complies with the Council's housing in the countryside design guidance, which is the key policies and guidance that we would apply to the site. Part 6 about master plans, that's not applicable to this development. Part 7 is about being compatible with LDP placemaking maps. There's no placemaking maps for the site, so it's not applicable. Ensure that there's no unacceptable loss of safeguarded areas of open space or green infrastructure and prime quality agricultural land. There's no such loss here. Part 9, protect and enhance natural and built heritage designations. There are no designations on the site, and link to it and integrate with green infrastructure where possible. There's no green infrastructure to link with, so it's not incompatible with Part 9. Part 10, ensure that there are no unacceptable impacts on the landscape character or tourism offer. We refer here back to the detailed policies where we've assessed the site. It is a single 1.5-storey dwelling within a cluster, and I obviously showed the site photos. There is no adverse landscape impact on the back of this development. It nestles into the cluster in our view. Part 11, meet with the requirements of all relevant service providers and the Ayrshire Roads Alliance. I refer members to the consultee responses. There are no objections, and ARA have also raised no objections subject to conditions which CARE has elaborated on. And Part 12, be accessible to all. That's not generally applicable in the kind of wider sense. It's normally aimed at larger developments, but the house itself would have to meet any building warrant requirements for being accessible and so on. So those are the reasons why we believe it is compatible. Now, ultimately, it's planning judgment on whether it's compatible. Officers have made that assessment. It's been through the team leader and myself as interim operations manager. I'm quite content with that recommendation. I do believe it complies with OP1 and for the reasons that are set out here, but hopefully that elaboration helps you, Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, David. Councillor Mackay, and then I want to move on to someone else. Councillor Mackay, you want to come back?
Thank you. No, I'm satisfied with that, and thank you for your intervention, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And can I just, your chair's prerogative, jump in here before we leave this one? Just something that bothered me there. You said, and I think it was in reference to Part 8, although I might have got that bit wrong. You said there was no loss of agricultural land. But earlier on, we had the discussion whether this was agricultural land or a garden. And I thought you were coming down on the side it was agricultural land. It can't be agricultural land and then there's no loss of agricultural land. Sorry, I don't mean to be cheeky, but I am. I have a difficulty there. If you could just help me, please.
Absolutely, Chair. It's possible when I've been explaining it and going through there that I've maybe missed a word, but Part 8 refers to prime quality agricultural land. That has a particular meaning in terms of land use, and it's not prime quality agricultural land. Right. I would be happy to remain with my previous description of the site. That's fine.
That's a bit I missed. What we're saying is this might be agricultural land, but it's not primary agricultural land, is what you're saying. That's correct. I understand now. Thank you. Thanks, committee. Do we have any more questions for clarification at this time? Sorry. Oh, Craig, do you want in? Yeah, please.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully, I will be brief. Members, you've obviously seen the paperwork. You've heard both the objectors and the applicant set out their positions in relation to this matter. At the heart of it, I don't think there is any dispute, and I think everyone would agree that at this location there is a cluster of houses. The question is whether or not, in terms of the policy, there is sufficient capacity at this location for there to be an additional house to be granted planning permission. You've heard Mr. Noble and his view on it, and clearly you've also heard from David Wilson this morning, where David has set out the reasoning and thought process behind the planning services position on this, namely that there are 7 houses at this location, failing which there are 6. And having come to that conclusion, they have carefully considered what is at this location and also the planning history in terms of the consents, previous and current, in terms of use, as well as the use made of Midton of Fullwood Cottage, which, as David has elucidated quite clearly, this was a house, and it has planning permission still to be a house, and that it's the planning services position there has been no change in use. It is still residential in nature. So the planning services position is clearly, having thought about it, having carefully considered it, that as a minimum there are 6 houses, as a maximum there are 7. But irrespective of whether it's 6 or 7, the main policy is Res 5.2, Roman numeral 2, and that it states that you can have a maximum of 50% within clusters that clearly were not defined as settlements at the point where the current local development plan was adopted. And irrespective of whether it's 6 or 7, the policy would allow three additional houses to be built on the basis of planning's analysis. And therefore, given there are 2 existing planning consents, this house would form the third. In other words, there would not be, if you accept the assessment that's been carried out by the planning service, what this would then mean is that if members were minded to approve this application today, no further houses would be capable of being built at this location in terms of the current policy. So in other words, the maximum would be reached in terms of the cluster itself in totality. Clearly, we have to assess this application on its planning merits, and as a consequence of that, the statutory test clearly is that it's assessed in accordance with the development plan, unless there are material considerations that indicate otherwise. In terms of the development plan, it is in the assessment would require to be considered against the relevant policies that apply to this application. Now, you have heard from Mr. Noble where he has made reference to which he considers to be a relevant policy being Res 1. You've also heard from David Wilson in terms of his view on policy Res 1, and in particular his view that policy Res 1 applies to development within settlement boundaries. Clearly, members, it is a matter for you to consider which policies you do consider to be reasonable, but on the face of what David Wilson has indicated around the wording of policy Res 1, it would tend to suggest that it is not relevant to the consideration of this application on the basis it is more tailored towards settlements. This cluster, if I can call it that, is not a settlement. It is a cluster of houses that are tied in terms of geography and connection. And as a consequence of that, the reason why you will have seen that policy Res 5 is being put forward is because it's not a defined settlement, in the same that a number of towns and villages within East Ayrshire have defined settlement boundaries in terms of the local development plan. Now, except that Mr. Noble and others may not necessarily accept that position, but what you do have to consider in coming to a view is, on its planning merits, is in exercising the planning judgment, whether or not you accept the position that's been put forward by the planning service this morning. And in exercising that planning judgment, we have to exercise it reasonably based upon what you've heard today. And as such, you know, the bottom line here, members, is that planning service have clearly put their position forward, as have the objectors, and you now require to consider whether or not you're willing to accept the position, having heard from planning this morning that it's reasonable to reach that particular position. From my perspective, you know, my advice would be that I do consider the position that the planning service have put forward to be reasonable, but I recognise ultimately it's a matter for you members to take the decision today. You also have to consider, notwithstanding that, if it does overcome the hurdle that there is another house that's capable of being built at this location, if I can put it this way, you then have to consider whether or not this proposed house would stick out like a sore thumb or not. And therefore, clearly, you would require to consider whether or not, in terms of design and what is being proposed, it would be appropriate at this location regard to the existing properties around it. However, members, in doing that, you will have heard that there are proposed planning conditions there that, if you were minded to approve this application, could be put in place around about the approval of external materials and finishes to to ensure that such materials and finishes would require the further approval of the planning service before actually, they could be used as part of any potential development. You've also heard about, I think, as we've gone through this, the number of stories that are proposed for the house, and also the houses round about and what story size they are, in order to come to that view. Clearly, members, there's a very full planning assessment in the report. You've also heard from the officers, and you've also had the opportunity to hear from the objectors. Having done so, certainly, members, I would suggest there is a very full assessment within the papers. It does appear that it has been set out reasonably and has taken account of relevant considerations, albeit this morning we've heard from an objector about whether or not two houses are one or not. But notwithstanding that, it would appear that there is a basis in policy terms for the recommendation to be considered and taken forward by yourselves this morning in a positive way. But I do recognise, members, it's a matter ultimately for you regarding this.
Okay, thank you, Craig, but I don't think we're actually at that stage yet. I still think we're at the stage of collecting information. So, colleagues, do you have any more questions for officers for clarification, please? Councillor Mayor, thank you.
No, I think my question's been answered, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Todd.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks to the officers for clearing up some things. When I read the papers a couple of days ago, I had a couple of points that jumped out at me with this application, and I'd like to get into them if that's okay. David and maybe Craig, this one's directed at you, just to help me understand, because I'm not privy to the historical planning processes that fitted this cluster. If we take, please bear with me because I need to try and get my head around this. If we take the existing cluster where 4 houses, that meant Town End of Fullwood, Midton of Fullwood, Midton of Fullwood Cottage, because I accept it as a dwelling house, albeit in a desolate state, and High Fullwood. That would give me 4 dwelling houses. Do you see where I'm coming from, David?
If it's with the Chair's discretion, I'll talk you through the
Yes.
6 that I believe.
Well, are you finished with your first question, or will we let you finish then, David, come in?
Let me finish, please.
Yes, please go ahead then, David. We'll let the councillor finish and then you can come in, okay? Please go ahead, Councillor Todd.
Thank you. And I believe, and I may be wrong, this is where David can help me, the three planning applications in principle, and please correct me if I'm wrong, were Mid Fullwood, because that's relatively new, and what is the current the planning principle that was given to the buyer that sits at the north of Midton of Fullwood. Because if there was a planning application in principle that was given to that, and it says the flat there, and if our planners have recognised in the past that that could be classified as a dwelling house, being converted, then does that not take us up to the 50% of the cluster allowance? Please, can I clarification for that, please?
David, you want to come in now, please?
Okay, thanks, Chair. I think the easiest thing to do here, I'll share my screen again, Councillor Todd, and I'll try and talk you through what properties we believe are the cluster and the kind of planning status of them.
David, I mean, that's good. The trouble, and I don't know about the rest of the committee because they'll have their own screens, but the trouble for me is I can't actually quite make out what's on your screen up there. What's easier for me is referring to the diagram on page 78. So perhaps you could do both both for us.
Certainly, Chair.
And that'll
That's-
solve my
well-
eyesight problem. Thank you.
Chair, if it helps, David, I think the map on page 78 of members' papers also forms part of David Wilson's presentation. It might help if he gets that plan up. It's the one that Mr Noble was speaking to as well.
I'll leave that, if you can bear with me at the moment, I'll do that if members want, but I think this will be the easiest way to explain it, as the Chair's requested. I'll talk to both plans. So if we turn to page 78, and also look at the shared screen, because the plan in page 78 is the site plan that was submitted, so it's not the kind of slightly wider one that I'll refer to as a bit of background. So talking members just through the numbers of properties. So we'll start on the western side. So Town End of Fullwood is the first property. Then there's Mid Fullwood. I know Councillor Todd, you suggested that that was contributed to the cluster, or the available numbers to be added to the cluster, but that was consented under a different policy and at a different time. That was before the current local development plan, and that was built and has been in place at the time of the local development plan. So that one doesn't count towards the 3 potential dwellings that could be constructed under Res 5. So that to me is property 2. We then go to the north of the road. That was where there was some debate about whether that was 1 or 2 properties. I'm quite happy to take Mr Noble's position, given he lives there, that is actually occupied as a single house, but there was planning history on there from a number of years ago that there was a conversion allowed. Now, it may have been over time that was done and then reverted back, or I'm not sure, but for the purposes of today, I'm quite happy to take that as a single house. So that's house 3. House 4, as we move back to the south of the road, is Midtown of Fullwood Cottage. And I've talked about that in terms of that's the property. It's a bit more in a rundown, derelict condition, but for the purposes of the policy, it remains a property. The next one along is High Fullwood, which I would number as number 5. This is where the plan at page 78 isn't helpful, because just to the east of High Fullwood there is a further property, which is Townhead of Fullwood. And that can be seen by members on the shared screen at the moment, which is listed as property 7. But for the purposes of today's discussions, that would be property 6, essentially. So that is the 6 existing properties of the cluster. And then also on the shared screen, but you can see the blue and the green outline on the shared screen. For the purposes of the chair that's looking at the map on page 78, it's the land to the north of property 1, the Town End of Fullwood. So across the road, there is consent in that location for 2 dwellings. Now, those dwellings do take out 2 out of the 3 available properties under the cluster property policy. So hopefully that explains a bit better, Councillor Todd, what we think of what are the existing properties and the additional properties. So 6 existing properties, 2 consented properties under policy Res 5, and this current application would be the 3rd property under policy Res 5, making 50% of the cluster. So this would be the final property available under policy Res 5 as it stands. So there would be no additional dwellings could be added after this one if it was consented under that particular strand of the policy. That's not to say that there might not be any justifications for houses under other policies, but that's by the by for today. For today's discussions, this would be the 3rd property and up to the 50% of the existing cluster. So hopefully that's a bit clearer.
No, thanks very much, David. You've cleared up, because I wasn't privy to the history of Mid Fullwood and the buyer, and I accept that you're saying that they were out with the present local development plan. So you've cleared that up. Thank you. The second one was, when I looked at the photographs when you did the presentation today, the prospect of a gap site raises concerns for me, because in the terms of a a gap site, my understanding, is a site that is totally unrelated to an existing enclosure, an existing house. Mr. Noble is asserting today that this area, this proposed area for this application, is actually part of the garden of Midfullwood. And when Midfullwood, I take it, was passed in principle, it was that whole delineated area was classed as one site for Midfullwood when it passed planning in the previous local development plan. So this is the point I want to get clear on. Why are we now saying that this is a totally separate site for this proposal when it wasn't a totally separate site, or when Midfullwood got its planning application? Because I take it to be delineated then that this proposed site now was part of Midfullwood's proposed build. Thanks. And that's me. That's I just need clarification in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. David?
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to share my screen again. It's in and it's out, I'm afraid, today, but it's the easiest way just to explain it. Bear with me. So this is the shared screen. I think I touched on this earlier. The property 2, which is the property you're referring to, Councillor, the Midfullwood, you'd see the shading that's associated with Midfullwood, the kind of yellow colour that goes with that. I would take that to be the clear associated garden ground that should go with Midfullwood. Now, it's not to say that they don't own, well, they clearly do own the application site and the land round about it, and they may use it in some sort of way as semi-garden type area, but I wouldn't class that as true garden ground for a property at Midfullwood. They may have a semi-formal use as garden, but in terms of the policy, it's not true garden ground. And even if it was garden ground, that in itself isn't sufficient, in my view, to not describe this as a gap, because the garden would be particularly generous for that property, and its loss would be of no impact on Midfullwood itself. But to be honest, I don't really accept that is true garden. It's probably got a kind of semi-formal use, as the owner's entitled to use it as such, but it's not formally laid out as a garden, in my view. So it still remains a gap site. I believe the plan there in front of you, I think, shows that about the kind of proper space that goes with each property. Hopefully that's a bit of clarity for you on what my view is on it.
Thank you, David. I don't think there's anybody else waiting, so I'll jump in if there isn't. I've got a couple of questions that I think they're quite easy ones. I just want some clarification. And this isn't really part of the deliberations. I'm just asking out of interest. We're taking 6 or 7, whichever it is, the number of houses, because that what was there in the last local development plan. Is that why that's used as a baseline?
Yeah, the policy specific.
Right. That's right. If the answer is yes, that's fine.
That's that.
So what I want to go on from that is, so we're in the midst of developing the new local development plan. So will 10 houses, I'm going on your figures just because it doesn't really matter here, will 10 houses then become the new baseline under the new local development plan, so we could then add another 5 houses? This wouldn't affect any decisions on this one, because I'll make my decisions based on what I've heard today and here. I'm really actually only asking out of interest. If these 3 houses get built before the new local development plan comes in place, would that then become the new baseline, which would allow another 5 houses, or am I wrong? Tell me I'm wrong.
It depends on what actually the final policy is in the new local development plan. At this point, that's not completely finalised, so it would be wrong of me to give you a definite yes or no. If the new plan has the exact same policy in it, then we can obviously refer to Res 5 as it currently is, and it does say that the grouping is expanded by a maximum of 15, but it has to be an existing clearly defined group of houses. So it would be whatever had been built out that you could add, but it's really a matter for the LDP2, and it would depend on the final policy.
Yeah, okay, thanks. It was only for more clarification. One that isn't, and this is maybe a small point, but we have had this before, and I know these are not our drawings, okay, but the drawing by the architects, which is on page 78 that I've been referring to, if I look at the sight line as it's drawn, as it goes left, it actually looks just like in the corner that actually cuts a wee bit into land that belongs to Mid-Fullwood. Is that just the way it's been drawn? Or does it? Can you see where I am?
I do see where you are, Chair. It may well do, but that in itself isn't anything to prevent us from approving it. It's in the control of the applicant. It is their ground anyway. So regardless of that, it's all been
right.
done.
Okay, because that's a donor house. Okay.
Quite whether it does nip over the land or not, or whether it's on the road verge, it's not such a big problem for that.
Okay,
property.
that's fine. You've satisfied me. Thank you. Okay then, folks. Thanks for indulging me. Is there anybody else wants to come in before we move to deliberation? No. Okay then, we can move to deliberation now. I think that's the hearing over, so move to deliberation now. Anybody got anything for us? We have a recommendation. Councillor Cook, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, Chair, just to approve the recommendation on the basis of the officer's report with the conditions attached, in particular the condition about traffic management plan.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Do we have a seconder?
Thank you. I will second. Thank you.
Sorry, was that? I didn't quite.
Councillor Mackay.
Okay, Councillor Mackay, second. Okay. Is anyone otherwise minded? No one is otherwise minded? Well, looks, folks, we gave that a good hour and a half going through, so it seems to me that it's been quite thorough. We appear to have a decision. Lynn, do you want to read out our decision, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The decision of the committee is that the application has been approved, subject to the conditions as detailed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Folks, as I just said, we've been an hour and a half of that. Can I suggest we just take 5 minutes for the old men to visit a place? Thank you. Back at 11:35 prompt, please. Oh, folks, listen. We're it's past 25 to. Can we just is there a way to make sure everybody's back?
I think Emily's left. Chair, no one's left the chat.
Okay,
Chair, so.
right. In which case, folks, I'm going to push on. So, I'm now going to go back to agenda item number 3, which is the planning application number 21/0611/PP, the erection of two dwelling houses and siting of temporary caravan at High Bohill Farm, U33 Woodhead, from A71 to C133 Newmills, East Ayrshire, and it's on pages 5 to 49 in your papers. Fiona, is it you this time or back to David? Okay then, Fiona, thank you. You want to take us through the papers, please?
Will do. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. The application is before committee today because it is a local development. However, it has received more than 10 objections, and under the council scheme of delegation, it requires to be considered by planning committee. The application site at High Bohill Farm is accessed via single track private access, serving Low and High Bohill Farms to the north of East Ayrshire. The wind turbines for Whiteley start some 700 metres to the east of High Bohill. Adjacent and out with the application site is High Bohill Farmhouse, which is single storey with adjoining barns and ranges. A number of buildings and sheds lie to the east, including that of the application site. There is a static caravan without the benefit of planning permission that sits to the southeast of the proposed housing plots and now forms part of this application. The application site is located within the rural diversification area as defined in the East Ayrshire Local Development Plan 2017. The current planning application is for the erection of two dwellings and for the siting of the temporary caravan until the completion of the houses. Details of the house design are outlined and explained starting at paragraph 5 on page 6 of your papers. If I can now ask members to turn to the screens, I'll do my best to run through the application details for you. So just bear with me whilst I work through the presentation. Okay, so is that reading okay? I can see it on the TV screen here, but is everybody okay? Sorry, 2 seconds. Okay, I think that gives you a better screen. This is the red line site area here outlined, and you can see how that it is to the north of East Ayrshire. We have the Whiteley Forest up here, members, and to the south you can see the A71 running down below the site over to the Irvine Valley with Newmilns and Darvel. Here we have the application site, member. We have what is termed as House 1, and then below, and that's to the north with the planting roundabout, and to the south we have termed as House 2, and you'll see the reference in the report to the different shape of House 2. You'll see that just the red line site and the area over here, members, to the southeast. And to the west of the site you'll see is High Bohill Farm. So we have first as house type 1, members, and this is the development and the design and the layout for a house of the plot and the design of the house, and you'll see the floor plan there as well. Turning to House 2, you'll see the layout and the design and the floor plan here for House 2. This is the plan that we always put up, members, for you in each application, just to show you the local development plan map, and you'll see that the white background signifies that it is within the rural diversification area. Various photos, members, approaching the site. That's the farm building referred to in the report that's existing next door, that's out with the site, and you'll see the access track leading up, and you'll see the wind turbines in the background. So that's the single-storey barn that's referred to in the application, member, in the application details in the report. And you've just got some images, members, looking around about the site. Looking up to the north of the site, members. Looking back down towards the south for plot 2. See the caravan in the distance, members? And that's the adjacent property there. I'll stop sharing my screen now there, members. Hopefully do it correctly and not log myself out. Okay, turning back to the report, in terms of consultations, these start at paragraph 10 on page 7. Environmental Health Service and Scottish Water have not objected, whilst ARA at paragraph 11 hasn't objected, subject to passing places in the private access. Members are asked to know the reply relative to the difficulties with conditioning this matter, given the access road is out with the red line site boundary. Looking at representation, these commence at paragraph 13 of the report. On page 9, 27 objections have been received to the planning application. There have been 51 letters of support or expressing neutral comments. All objections are outlined and responded to in your report. In summary, the points include details of lack of justification on either a business or livestock basis, lack of clarity if the site can accommodate 2 houses, concerns regarding design, height, overshadowing of the neighbouring house and impact on neighbouring livestock, drainage and septic tank concerns, concerns regarding suitability of the access road, concern regarding information on plans, boundary and land ownership matters or access rights, and utility concerns, lack of permission for a caravan, impacts on neighbouring business and comment on responses from the applicant or agent, and eco matters. The report before you, members, outlines the responses to each and every one and also clarifies where and where not these are material planning considerations. The letters of support are outlined starting at paragraph 40 on page 17 and in summary relate to the quality of design and finishes, good quality plans for families, views over the countryside, the eco-design, small scale of development, benefits to local area and habitats, access concerns being unwarranted. In terms of sections 25 and 37.2 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 97 as amended, we are required that planning applications be determined in accordance with the development plan unless the material considerations indicate otherwise. Proposal for the erection of 2 number houses and the siting of the temporary caravan is considered to be contrary to the East Ayrshire Local Development Plan policies OP1 subsections 1, 3, 5 and 10. Obviously that's referring to Roman numerals there, members. Policy Res 5, Policy T1, ENV 6 and ENV 8. No other policies support the proposed development at this location. The principle of development at this proposal cannot be supported in this instance by the local development plan. In addition, the design of both dwelling houses is not suitable. The critical policy here, members, is back to Policy Res 5, subsection 3, as the proposal for 2 dwelling houses in principle cannot be supported on the grounds of the site being brownfield in excess of 0.25 hectares, as Policy Res 3 would support the development of 1 house per site, not 1 house per 0.25 hectares of brownfield land. Even if the assumption that Policy Res 5 Part 3 supports the development of 1 house per each plot, each 0.25 hectares, only 1 house would be supported since not all of the claimed brownfield land can be fully demonstrated to be brownfield in nature, and as such the total brownfield area is 0.3 hectares. With the proposal is contrary to Policy T1, as I've advised above, with regards to the indivisible passing places, and it is not appropriate to condition these matters as detailed in the report. The proposal is contrary to Policy ENV 6, as there has been no survey provided to establish whether there are protected species, such as bats roosting or using the small barn or shed present in terms of House Plot 2, and whether mitigation measures would be required to protect the species under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981. The proposal is contrary to ENV 8 in relation to the design and massing of House 2 in terms of its significant impact on landscape character, which then links back to Policy OP1. With regard to the material planning considerations referred to above, the planning history for the site is relevant in that Policy Res 5 Part 3 has been previously tested for the consideration of 1 dwelling on a minimum of 0.25 hectares of site and was granted planning permission in principle. The applicant has attempted to apply this to 2 houses, and the proposal therefore fails as it is 1 dwelling house, that it would be appropriate. There are some valid concerns raised in the objections received in the representations, which are considered to carry greater weight in supporting reasons for refusal. Excuse me. The letters of objection, therefore, are considered to have greater weight than the letters of support. In other material considerations, the proposal does not meet with the spirit of Scottish planning policy, as it does not meet the identified acceptable rural housing policies of the local development plan, unlike the earlier approval in 2019. In addition, the concerns about the design and scale of the dwellings does not align with Scottish planning policy's requirement for high-quality designed homes. The supporting information from the applicant and agent has, whilst noted, does not warrant approval and overrule local development plan policies. With regard to consideration of amenity, such as overlooking and overshadowing, these are not considered to be adversely affected by the proposal, although the general character of the area is impaired by the way the incongruous dwellings which are not appropriate to a rural setting. With regard to design, the design of House 1 is characteristic of modern suburban houses, and the size, proportions and spatial configuration of House 2 are not in keeping with the existing buildings typologies characteristic of the rural area. In addition, no information has been submitted in terms of landscape assessment to illustrate there be no adverse impact. In conclusion, the application is considered to be contrary with the local development plan, primarily on the basis of principle of development, access, design and lack of information on protected species. The material considerations do not indicate that the application should be approved, contrary to the development plan, also noting that the development is in conflict with a number of those considerations. The application is therefore presented for refusal for the reasons stated in Appendix 1 of this report, starting at page 46 of your papers. Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. Colleagues, do we have any questions for clarification at this time, please? I don't see any, Lynn. Can you see any? No? Well, in that case, if everybody's happy to understand, do I have a proposal? We have a recommendation at page 5, paragraph 2. Do we have a proposal? Councillor Maitland?
I propose we go with the recommendation.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you. And is anyone otherwise minded? No? Okay then, in that case we have a decision. Lynn? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The decision of the committee is that the application has been refused for the reasons detailed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Fiona, and thank you, colleagues. Okay, on to agenda item number 5 now. It's planning application number 21/0022/AMCPP, a proposed new affordable housing development. Is it for 101 units comprising of single-storey amenity and wheelchair bungalows together with a 2-storey general needs dwellings, roads, drainage and landscaping at Bridge House Road, Kilmarnock. Commas are important. Thank you very much. Who's taking us through this one? Fiona again? Okay, thank you, Fiona. Off you go, pal.
Thanks again. Just give me 1 wee second. I'll try and do the share tree despite my technological ineptitude.
And we're page 79 to 124 if anyone's looking for it.
Apologies, Chair. I'm just having some problems with this.
That's fine.
If you could just give me a second.
We will.
I'll go for the fail-safe method and just actually scroll through. Okay. Apologies, members. As you know, I'm not technologically great at things sometimes. So thank you, Chair. This application is before committee today as it is a major development, and under the scheme of delegation, it requires to be considered by planning committee. The application site is located within the settlement boundary of Kilmarnock and is bounded to the east and southeast by the A77, to the west, north and southeast by the residential estates of Belfield and Shortleys. The application site forms part of a larger land release for residential use, for which planning permission in principle was approved under application reference 16279 PPP, and this was the housing opportunity site within the local development plan. The larger site is split by Treeswood Head Road and Bridge House Hill Court, which is adjacent to but not included in the application site. The application site measures approximately 2.2 hectares and is currently an open field with mixed hedging to the A77 boundary, the site rising from the A77 to the houses within Belfield and Shortleys neighbourhood. The application is for the approval of matters specified in conditions for the Planning Permission in Principle application for the detail of the construction of new affordable housing units, housing development for 101 units comprising single-storey amenity and wheelchair bungalows together with 2 stories general needs dwellings, roads, drainage and landscaping as stated at paragraph 10 on page 81 of your papers. The application background regarding the Planning Permission in Principle consent is also outlined for you members at paragraph 7 on page 81, although I have touched on it already. If I can ask you to turn to your screen, I'll do my best to go through these slides for you. Here we have the red line site members, just to show you in relation to the A77, which runs to the south of the site, and you can see the Belfield and Shortleys neighbourhoods to the west and to the north. The red line site here, members, is as outlined in the application site as the red line site boundary for this detailed application. You'll see the application site here, members. Just to say to you that the sort of yellowy coloured houses are wheelchair bungalows, which would be specially designed and adapted for occupation on that basis. And the other properties in pink are for the amenity properties. These are all single-storey properties, members, and are the closest to the existing properties along Bridge House Hill Road up here, members. And the remainder of the housing in the sort of blue and the grey outline on the plan would show you that these are 2-storey houses. So you'll see that the site would be accessed with a direct access onto the road here, and you'll see a roundabout further down, members, that might take you into further phases. To the south of the site, you'll see the sort of steading shape of the converted Bridge House Hill Court, which is out with the application site for your information. Some house type plans for you members here, just to sort of flick through them. And some layouts, internal layouts. Single-storey properties, remember these are the amenity bungalows. These are 2-bedroom properties. And this would be the wheelchair bungalow for the wheelchair accessibility. And the layout there, members, which you can see with the wheelchair emblem to show how the site, how rooms can be moved about with wider doorways, wider hallways, etc. And you generally find these have a greater footprint. And you'll see the space for a car, members, being able to be parked under the carport, just at the very edge there of the drawing, for easy access into the property. Back to 2-storey general needs, members. Just some levels details showing you the existing houses at Bridge House Hill Road and how the site moves down in terms of the levels across the site, just in terms really of privacy, etc., that we can show you that. Just some streetscape images again, members, just to show you the sort of general streetscape as the site might be from within. The top longer one is A to A, which is the just to the south of, just shows you the amenity houses, and the shorter stretch B to B shows you the houses just alongside the street that faces at just the roundabout. Again, members, this is the local development plan that we've put up for the last 2 applications. We put it up for everything, and that shows you site 321H, which in that kind of peachy colour, which is housing opportunity, and it does have an extant planning permission in principle to back that up. Just some photographs, members. You can see in the distance Bridge House Hill Court. Just showing you the lie of the land, members. Looking towards 77. But looking back up, members, up, you can see how the land's rising there and how the site at the very base would be lower than the heights at these properties in the distance at the skyline, which would be Bridge House Hill Road, sorry, which are already there. Looking back up, members, again towards Bridge House Hill Road, etc., and the existing properties at Shortleys. Just to give you an idea of the area, members. I'll probably stop there, members. Just turning back to the report, in terms of consultations, they start at paragraph 18, page 84, and we have no objections from consultees. Looking at representations, these commence at paragraph 41 of the report on page 90, and one objection has been raised. All points are responded to in the report, and in summary generally relate to noise during construction, traffic matters, access paths and play areas, causing noise out with sight to existing residents, water pressure, privacy. All comments are responded to in the report, and again we've made it clear where matters are material planning considerations and where they aren't. Sections 25 and 37(2) of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act as amended require that planning applications be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. For the purpose of this application, the development plan comprises the adopted East Ayrshire Local Development Plan 2017 and the Minerals Local Development Plan of 2020. In this instance, all relevant policies are contained within the East Ayrshire Local Development Plan. Policies are on the whole complied with. As indicated in the report, there are material considerations relevant to the application, and it is considered that these are supportive of the application on the whole. The proposed development can be satisfactorily accommodated within the site, which is allocated for housing purposes as proposed in the LDP. The proposal can offer gains in biodiversity, will result in an attractive site, and will add to the existing housing offer of Kilmarnock and in the North Shortleys neighbourhood in particular. Consultation responses are supportive and there are no outstanding matters that cannot be controlled via planning condition. There was one representation against the application, and none of the matters raised are of sufficient weight to suggest refusal of the proposals. Overall, the proposals comply, and therefore we would recommend that the application be approved subject to the conditions that are detailed in Appendix 1 of your report, starting on page 116. Just before I hand back to the Chair, if it's okay, Councillor Jenkins, can I just refer members to the recommendation and correct paragraphs 88, 89 and paragraph 3, which are on pages 114 and 79. The developer contribution should actually be for 99 houses, not 101, so the relevant figure would be 19,602, as the developer contribution is only payable on non-social housing properties. So to equate to the 200 approved under the planning permission principle, that means that 99, not 101, would be subject to the developer contribution if members chose to approve the application. So back to yourself, Chair.
So we'll lose £396. Oof, wow. Okay, folks. Over to you. Do we have any questions for clarification at this stage? Councillor Maitland?
Yeah, I'm looking for quite a bit of clarification on speed limits. Is Care there? I can't quite see. I think Care's in there. But it's concerning. Here, yeah. Thank you. It's concerning. If you look at page 91 at paragraph 43, and it talks about our master plan and wanting people to walk first, etc. And that this new area, I want clarification, is going to be 20 miles per hour. But it's going to add to more traffic. And we know that we have speeding down Lammermuir Road that goes into Portriggs School, and then we hit speed bumps in Portriggs. But if you look at the density of the whole of Shortleys and Belfield in the little grey map, most of these streets should be 20 miles per hour. You can't go above that in most of them because of the way the parking is. However, Lammermuir, which will join onto this at the top, is the only road that people can speed on in that area apart from Lorraine Drive, and they speed. And we're having constant requests that it goes down to 20 miles an hour. I know Care knows about this as well. So it seems a bit unfair that the people who remain in the older houses in Treeswood Hedge Road and Bridgehouse Hill are going to stick at 30 miles an hour. And these are very concentrated in cul-de-sacs in there as well. Yet the people in the new amenity houses, they'll get 20 miles per hour. And we want people walking around that area as well. So I think we have to consider not just that development, but the impact it's going to have on the streets. Now, I feel quite strongly about this. And we're talking about amenity housing as well. We also have Lammermuir Court, so that with amenity houses, and they go speeding past that and people have to exit that, and that's a cul-de-sac. So I actually think this is an opportunity to address the speeding problems that we have in the area. So I would like to add on, if we approve this, that somehow, now I know it's complicated because the developer has to pay for the 30 mile per hour, but I think it should be 20 mile per hour the whole area. We have this giant Lammermuir Road, a school at one end, residential at the other, amenity housing, and still we speed down it. And we want people walking. And I think that speed in Lammermuir Road is putting people off walking. And these are amenity housing, so we need people that can walk and get about easy. So sorry if that sounds like a soapbox, but I think there's an opportunity here to sort something out that's been a long-standing problem. And I would like clarification if we could add that on. Thank you.
Okay, then I think what I'm going to do, Councillor, is I'm going to ask Kerr initially to come in there, and then I think I'm going to ask Craig if it's within our competence in this to do something, and perhaps both of you, if it's not within our competence to do something, as Councillor Maitland is asking, what would be the route? If we could do that. Okay, so Kerr, can you just respond initially? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll maybe just begin with the development itself, and just to confirm that we've seeking 2 advisory notes to go with any consent. The first one would be that, as Councillor Maitland has noted, that the loop road within the development would be subject to the promotion of a 20 mile per hour speed limit, and the applicant would be responsible for the costs of promoting the legal order for that and the implementation costs of that. And we're also seeking that the applicant would meet the cost of promoting an extension of the existing 30 mile per hour limit on Treeswood Head Road out to beyond the new roundabout that's proposed as part of that. The roundabout itself, as you come in from the rural area, will be a good sort of gateway feature to the residential area, and that's where the revised speed limit should start. So that's what we're asking of the developer for this particular application. Just in terms of 20 mile per hour speed limits in general, absolutely, we fully support the principle of 20 mile per hour in residential areas. The members might be aware, there's been quite a lot of discussion in kind of national policy terms around 20 mile per hour limits and whether it might become the default speed limit in residential areas, but there's still legislation to that effect hasn't been brought forward yet. So what that does mean that if we wish to introduce a 20 mile per hour speed limit on any roads, we have to undertake that through an individual traffic regulation order. So, and we have been working over the years and to introduce 20 mile per hour speed limits, particularly focusing on areas around schools and in sort of sensitive residential areas. We are conscious that this development site is right adjacent to the large sort of wider Belfield and Shortleys area. There are pockets of 20 mile per hour speed limits in that area. And, through time, we would like to develop those and have a more comprehensive network of 20 mile per hour speed limits in the area, and perhaps even having the whole Belfield Shortleys area as a 20 mile per hour speed zone. We obviously have to work with Police Scotland on that in terms of consultation as the enforcing authority. We do need their support to bring forward 20 mile per hour limits. In some cases, the recommendation from Police Scotland might be that we might need to have supporting traffic calming measures so that the limit themselves become self-enforcing and are not perhaps perceived to be unrealistic. So it's an area that we are very, very keen to tackle, and it would be beneficial to us if there was national legislation that did make that step change to making it a default in urban areas, but at the moment in time that's not the case, and we do have to promote 20 mile per hour speed limits as and when we wish to promote them. So in considering this application, as Fiona mentioned her application, the transport assessment for the application was carried out as part of the PPP application in 2016. So, you know, the kind of traffic impacts of it were considered at that time, and we felt it would be unreasonable to recommend that the further changes to speed limits in the wider Shortleys Belfield area would be reasonable as part of our consideration of that. So yes, I recognise the points you're raising, Councillor Maitland, and as a service, you know, we are committed to the rollout of 20 mph zones in all our residential areas, and that's something that, you know, as a service, we'd be happy to work with the local communities and to try and accelerate that programme in time. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Craig, do you want to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair, and I'm mindful of what Kerr has said there, particularly in relation to the transport assessment that was carried out for the planning permission in principle in relation to the larger site, of which this one forms a part, where it was suggested that it would be unreasonable to consider a more extensive use of the 20 mph speed limit in relation to this as part and the wider Bridge House Hill site. The reason that clearly I mention that is, as members will be aware, certainly in the context of planning conditions, the planning circular requires you to consider 6 tests, one of which is, would it be reasonable? And therefore, certainly, I think from what Kerr has said in terms of doing something with this particular area, it may not fulfil or comply with the tests of the circular on planning conditions, and therefore it would certainly appear from what Kerr has said that it may not be appropriate to look to attach something in terms of this application. That said, clearly, members, there would appear to be a wider issue, and I think it would be incumbent upon us as officers, again, having heard from you in relation to those concerns, that we do look, I think, within the wider Shortleys area at extending where we can, through consultation with Police Scotland, those 20 mph limits more generally. And I think certainly, although I know while Kerr will be leaving us shortly, I would hope that certainly his successors will take up that, and I would be asking them, given the concerns that are being raised this morning within that wider area, to consider that more fully, you know, within that context. But through you, Chair, you know, I'm not sure if my planning colleagues would disagree or otherwise with that, but it may be that the way to deal with it would be more generally through the powers available to ARA within the wider area. And certainly in recognition of your comments this morning, Councillor Maitland, I would expect that to be fed back and become something that has to have serious consideration in the days and weeks and months ahead.
Thank you, Craig. I think just before you come, I'm going to let you come back, Councillor Maitland, but I think Fiona would like to come in at this point. Fiona, can you add something to help us?
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Chair. I just thought I'd come in, seeing as how Craig looked in my direction. So, but yes, I respect everything that's been said and appreciate the issues, Councillor Maitland. Obviously, what we have here is a planning permission in principle for this development. This is a detailed application for the discharge of conditions of that planning permission in principle, and I do agree that it would be out with the terms of this application in order to deal with what you wish to deal with, and it would be something that, to my mind, would be best dealing with through ARA Direct as a wider issue within the local neighbourhood. I don't feel it is something that we could control, I'm afraid, today through this application. I do feel it would be ultra vires to do so, which means it would be under legal powers. So it is a matter in my position as a planner to advise you that it would be for wider use or wider discussion and then resolution out with this planning application's remit and I hope that helps, but apologies if it was a bit blunt.
Okay, Councillor Maitland, do you want to come back in?
Nothing wrong with blunt, Fiona, absolutely nothing. I would point out that this traffic, the planning and principal traffic survey was done 6 years ago. We have a school there now. We have a giant school campus. Now, I'm sure that was incorporated into the thinking 6 years ago, but one of the main problems in this ward is children will not walk because of Lammermuir Road. Now, half of what rigs, speed bumps and controlled in a roundabout. Lammermuir in the approach, none. Now, I think we're going to add to the volume, and I appreciate this is out with the remit of this actual planning, but it is impacting. We must measure surely the impact on the surrounding areas, and it should have been 20 miles per hour when the school was built. It should have been done then and there, and I think I just saw this as an opportunity to point out this is a dangerous road. It's a very dangerous road, and we're building amenity housing. We already have amenity housing. We have a primary school and we have a nursery, and I don't know how, but somehow we have to get that into this paper, and it has to be 20 miles per hour. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Maitland, thank you for that. I mean, I think what we need to do is, and others can come in this one, but I think what we need to do is, by the letter of the planning law, we have to look at this application that we have before us this morning. I personally, and I'm sure others, will have great sympathy and agree exactly what you're saying. I'm just not sure that we have the ability to do what you're asking. And I can only suggest that on these wider matters that are out with this planning permission, that you contact ARA and make sure we've got in writing that they are going to look at these things. And I'm sure they'll do that. If there's been an exchange of emails saying they're going to look at this quite quickly, then I'm sure that's a way to take it forward. And if you're happy with that, that's what I'm going to rule. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Todd.
Thanks very much, Convener, and I would just like to reiterate everything that Councillor Maitland has said. I'd like to align myself with all of our comments. We've been going on about this for years now, and something needs to be done. Fiona, I've got a couple of points, a couple of issues in terms of the layout of the site, and I am absolutely heartened to see that planners and developers are looking at green spaces. The green spaces that I've incorporated in this development are great. It looks really good, and I know the topography of the area and the boundary of the gardens of Brighouse Hill Road. It goes out for a wee area, and I see that's where the green space is, and then it drops down. And it's been planned out perfectly. So well done to planners for stipulating that those top houses at the top of the hill should be single story, and that takes nothing away from the visual landscape. So well done for that. My only concern is, if you look at the map on page 124, the path that I fully support, that's to the northwest of the development, from Treeswood Head Road all the way up to the corner of the proposed site, the wee footpath, the access and egress onto Brighouse Hill Road. I hope that those residents of the existing houses, where that path network is going to impact on, have been consulted, because it's outside the red line of the planning application. I hope that they've been consulted to ask them their views on breaking into what has been literally their gardens for 50 years, and to see what their thoughts were on that. Have you got any thoughts on that, Fiona?
Yes, as part of the application, there would have been a neighbour notification, and there was a neighbour notification. I don't have enough on me to see if it was advertised locally, but there was a neighbour notification, and every property within 20 metres of the red line site was issued a neighbour notification by our admin team, and those properties being directly next door would have been neighbour notified about the proposals. So there was a consultation exercise there. As it's a major development, sorry, I'll leave it there. Actually, I was about to say something else, but that's actually wrong what I was about to say. So it was subject to neighbour notification, and letters of neighbour notification were delivered to those properties in Brighouse Hill Road, which is the area where you refer to.
No, thanks very much. But and I am prepared to be corrected. But all of those residents were notified that there was going to be a development here, a proposed development. But I don't think those individuals where the proposed access and egress were notified that that's where that proposal was going to be. They were notified by the developers that they were going to build these houses. And I fully support the houses. It's going to be an asset to the area and to everyone involved. But I have a concern for the access and egress on the wee walking part, and the red line that separates, I don't know if it's part of the planning, but can we reinforce that there's a substantial boundary fence is built along that line, and I think we really need to look closely at the access, pedestrian access and egress onto Brigus Hill Road. Thank you.
Am I okay to come back there? Yes.
Yes, thank you. Yes,
okay.
Fiona.
The neighbour notification was actually given by our department, not by developers. So the neighbour notification for this application was issued by our department, and that allowed people to know that they could come on and look at the actual layout plan that's before you, members. So the neighbour notification was issued on that basis. In terms of boundary treatment along the red lines plan, along the red line, along the application, I can't get my, along the red line application site, I'm not aware that there is any boundary treatment proposed for there in terms of the plan, but there is the existing boundary treatment between the properties that they already have along those boundaries. There is, I'll just double check if there's a red line, if there is a boundary treatment condition in here, if you can just give me a second. Yep, I've just been told it's condition number 13. So we have asked for details of what the boundary treatment will be, and that needs to be looked at as a planning condition if you grant approval today. And what we would also look at there is whether one is actually needed along that red line site, because if the properties at Bridge House Hill Road already have a boundary treatment, that's their boundary treatment and we can't change that legally, or the developer can't legally change that. So it's whether with the lie of the land there would be anything necessary up there. But obviously the properties would have their own boundary treatment proposals, but certainly we have condition 13 in there that we can have a look at the whole matter for you.
Councillor Todd, are you content? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Councillor Cook and then Councillor McFadden.
Councillor Cook and then Councillor McFadden, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just maybe to see if I can address the Councillor Gatlin's point. Would you be able to put a note in the minute of the meeting just to say that the our legal officer will take this matter up with officers in relation to that? If that could be just put into the minute of the meeting, and so there's a record of it. The question I was going to ask was in relation to condition number 20, where we're restricting the hours of operation, which I fully support. But normally, the last few times that restriction has been in terms of noisy work. This one doesn't refer to noisy work. This just says all work, and I'm just concerned that some of the houses at a distance, it might prevent them internally painting them or something, simply because of that restriction.
Am I okay to come back on that one, Chair? Yes.
Yes, thank you. And then I'll go to Craig on another matter.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'll let Lynn and Clay, I'll leave the matter about the minute to Craig and Lynn. Just in terms of condition number 20, the way we sometimes word it is for external construction work rather than noisy, because it's hard to define noisy. So sometimes we look at external construction work. I'm not sure whether the wording for that condition was actually taken from the planning permission in principle just to follow through or not. I don't have the planning permission in principle handy, but if you can give me 2 minutes whilst Craig and Lynn reply to that, I can certainly check it online for you, and I can clarify. Alternatively, if members prefer, you can change that wording to say external construction work, because that is sometimes how we do it. I'll leave it with you and I can go and check for the moment if you give me a second or two while Craig or Lynn answer.
yeah, Tom, I'm going to suggest that we'll let Fiona find out what you can and hear what it says, and if we're not happy, then we can go for a rewording. Craig, Lynn, I take it there's no, since Councillor Cook's brought it up, it's in the minute now anyway, is it not?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, obviously we are recorded today, so the comments will be there and are available for repeated viewing. Whilst it wouldn't form part of the decision the minuted decision of today, we can follow up that with a non-minuted item or action, and I would write to the Ayrshire Roads Alliance to advise them of the concerns of the committee, if that is what is agreed. Thanks, Chair.
Well, that sounds to me to be a plan, and should get things moving along. Okay, Fiona, have you managed to?
I'm just reading through it at the moment. If you can just
sure.
Let me do that. I'll not be long with any luck.
Chair, just to say I'm happy with what Lynn's proposed in relation to.
Yeah, well, we can always just propose or change the wording if.
I'm ready.
Right,
Yep, the condition that's worded here is the same as what's worded in the PPP, the Planning Permission in Principle, and it doesn't say external construction works. So to be consistent, in my mind, in a planning terms, albeit recognising it's up to yourselves, it would be consistent to leave the wording as it is. We didn't, round about 2016 when the PPP was granted, thinking back, I don't think we did differentiate with external construction work. I think that's more been a later thing, a later thing that we started doing. But if you change the wording to say external construction works, unfortunately that wouldn't be consistent between the Planning Permission in Principle and this application, which is an approval of matter 5 specified in the Planning Permission in Principle. So in my mind, that's why it would be better to leave the condition alone, but I will defer to yourselves.
But yeah, so I hear what you're saying about consistency, but there's no legal reason why it can't be changed. Is that I've got you correct?
It's a difficult one because this is actually a follow-on application from the Planning Permission in Principle, and that's where I think the difficulty would come in with changing the wording of the condition.
Yeah, okay, but then again, this is going to be in the applicant's favour. If you can get the painters in doing a bit of overtime on a Saturday, then I can't see him objecting to it. But I'll leave it up to Councillor Cook whether he wants to bring it in as an amendment to the conditions or not. Okay, on that, we'll come back to that one. I'm going to move on from now. Do we have anybody else looking to come in for clarification? Councillor McFadden and then Councillor Maitland. Councillor McFadden.
Yes, thank you. On the back of what Councillor Maitland was saying earlier on about the speed limits, I mean, East Ayrshire is a place that likes to come in and do things first and set the way. So 20-mile-an-hour speed limits actually, they're not as effective as apparently we think. The Federal Highways Administration in America has done a huge study across lots and lots of states, and actually the corporation, the City of London Corporation, considering this as well. Partly people aren't really that content at walking in amongst vehicles, even doing 20 miles an hour. The perception of a car at 20 miles an hour is still apparently frightening and a little bit off-putting. The speed limits in these areas round about schools and new houses and dual use surface areas works fantastically better at 15 miles an hour. And the signage all needs to be in red, not in white on the roads. And adherence to 15 miles an hour is apparently far greater than adherence to 20 miles an hour. And apparently as well, especially a lot of the electric cars and hybrid cars are a much more efficient cruising around slowly at 15 miles an hour and often don't start their petrol engines. There's a massive load of reasons why 15 miles an hour is so much safer. People that walk out in front of a car doing 15 miles an hour, by the time the car hits the brakes, almost get hit or bumped over when the car is nearly stationary. Whereas at 20 miles an hour, the vehicle apparently is still usually travelling at least at 10 miles an hour.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McFadden. I'm just a wee bit concerned that this is outside our competence. So can you sort of word this in a way so it becomes some kind of question for clarification to officers, or I'm going to request that you bring it up in another forum that's more appropriate, because at the moment I can't see how we can rule on any of this. Thank you. I'm sorry. I hope you don't think I'm being rude, but that's what I'm thinking.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm just offering one of my rants. It's just because it was brought up, and I think, the 15 mile an hour thing, if officers could find a way to actually then bring it into planning applications would be my question, because I think it's very important, and I just want to back up Councillor Maitland's points. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm sure we all are sympathetic with. Well, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I'm sure a number of us will be sympathetic with what you're saying. Anyway, Craig's going to come in on that, and then I want to move on. Okay. Sorry, Kerr.
Yeah, thanks. It was just to clarify with Councillor McFadden that in the UK, 20 miles per hour is the lowest speed limit that can be introduced on a public road, and we don't have the power to introduce 15 mile per hour or 10 mile per hour speed limits, and clearly the 20 mile per hour is a maximum speed limit. As our police colleagues say, you know, it's not a target. We hope that people drive at appropriate speeds in residential areas, but by law at the moment, a 20 mile per hour limit is the lowest speed limit that we can introduce. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So with my tongue firmly in my cheek, John, there you go. It's all Westminster's fault. Councillor Maitland, and that was a joke, Tom. Okay, Councillor Maitland.
Thanks, Gordon. I'd just like to thank all my colleagues for their support here. I really appreciate that. It's something that will be addressed and hopefully in the local development plan, but I am actually looking for some clarification. Sorry. At this stage, Lynn said she would write to ARA about what has been raised here. What happens after them writing to ARA? I appreciate it. It's not in the decision we're making here, but I would like to know how writing to ARA will form further information. Am I making any sense at all? I want to know what happens now when Lynn writes to ARA. Thank you.
Well, again, like I said to John, I'm a wee bit concerned that this is outside the competence of this committee. I mean, presumably we could only speculate. What I would think would happen is I'll reply to you. If you didn't get a reply you're satisfied with there, that it gets taken to your political group and see if they'll bring it up at the full council. And if the full council makes a decision, I'm sure ARA will listen to that. That's what I think. But you know, if I'm wrong, but we need to move on. I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying, but we can't do anything about this at this meeting. Okay?
No, what I was asking really, Gordon, was I appreciate we have to make the decision within what's here, but I've never before had something taken off the table like that and put away. So that's what I was looking for clarification on. Quite happy to wait for a reply out with the meeting. Thank you.
Well, no, I'll let Craig come in because I might be wrong, but I think that would be the way it would proceed as far as I know. I've never done it myself, but that's what I would imagine.
Through you, Chair, obviously following this meeting, there's two things. One, we have the delayed recording, so members' concerns or issues they have within short lease in this locality are recorded now effectively for posterity in terms of the concerns that you have over the speed limits within this area. Notwithstanding that, a letter or an email will, following this meeting, be going to Kevin Braidwood to advise him that as a result of the concerns that have been expressed by a number of elected members in relation to the speed limit within not only the two streets that you specifically mentioned, but within the wider short lease area, given we have a new school, we have a number of issues there. We're talking about active travel, that basically elected members are asking that consideration be given in early course to reviewing the speed limits within those two roads particularly, but within the wider short lease area. And that basically it would be expected that he, following that review, would make contact with you to advise you of ARA's position. Notwithstanding that, members, and depending on the timescales that may be involved in this, as you are aware, the minutes of this planning committee require to be approved by full council in terms of the normal cycle of approving minutes. And it may be that on the back of the next cycle, depending on the answer you get, you know, members can, you know, ask specific questions on the back of the minutes at full council. So I think the first thing would be certainly for that email or letter to be going to Kevin Braidwood probably on Monday morning, expressing to him that members are clearly speaking loudly that they wish very early consideration to be given to the speed limits around that location, if that helps.
Claire, that sounds to me a clear way forward. Is that okay? Can we move on?
Absolutely. And thanks for the indulgence. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
No, always happy to help any way we can. Okay, is there anybody else who wants to ask questions for clarification? If not, does anybody want to put a motion forward for acceptance or rejection of the recommendations? Which are, sorry, what are papers which are on page 79?
Councillor Maitland.
Councillor Maitland.
I'd like to approve the I'm
proposal,
losing English now after 2.5 hours. I'd like to approve the conditions.
Okay.
Recommendation.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Councillor Todd's next, Chair.
Councillor Todd, you seconding?
Yes, convener, second. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone otherwise minded? No? Okay then, we have a decision.
Yep, thank you, Chair.
Sorry, it's me.
Thank you, members. Sorry, before I confirm the decision of the committee, Councillor Maitland, Councillor Todd, can I just confirm that you are moving the recommendations with the amendment as Fiona had detailed at the start, with the developer contributions being reduced to 99 houses? Yeah, thank you. To confirm the decision of the committees that the application for matters specified in planning permission in principle have been approved, subject to the conditions as detailed in the report, but that the decision notice was held until the development contribution payment of £19,602, which equates to 99 houses at £198, is set out in the Section 75 legal agreement and has been received. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, folks. So we're getting through it. We're up to agenda item number 6. Now we've got number 6 is a discharge of conditions, and number 7 and 8 are reports. So before we go into them, I just perhaps was going to do this at the end, but just in case it gets clouded by everybody saying cheerio at the end, I want to just say that today is a very special day for Kerr. It's his last, not just his planning committee, but it's his last council committee. So there you go. It's clear, Kerr, I just want to thank you at this stage for all the work you've done. You've been a big help to me at these meetings, and you know, I've always appreciated your advice. Even if I haven't always agreed with it, I've always appreciated it, and I'm sure everybody else in the committee has appreciated it as well. So thank you very much, Kerr. Thank you. Okay, let's go. Oh, you're getting a clap. Okay. Let's go on then. Vary, is this you next? Okay, folks, it's planning application number 220030/AMCPP. Application discharge of condition 28A of planning permission 17/0149/PP relating to aftercare of former Pow Harnell surface mine by Kirkmuir. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I will try to run through this report as quickly as possible. It should be fairly straightforward, hopefully. I'll just share my screen first of all. So this application relates to the discharge of condition 28A of planning permission 17/149/PP at Powarnell, which was for the restoration of the Powarnell open cast coal site. So this discharge of condition is essentially a tidying up exercise prior to the sale of land by Mines Restoration Limited on to others. Restoration of the site is now complete, which was reported to Planning Committee in April last year. Condition 28A requires a scheme of aftercare to be submitted 1 year following the completion of soil placement operations. What I would note is that aftercare is primarily being dealt with through a minute of agreement, a legal agreement, which is being negotiated between the relevant parties at the moment and is at its final stage. So that is the primary means of the aftercare scheme being delivered. And the delivery of the aftercare scheme is through what's called a residual Powarno mitigation and management plan. So that actually forms the basis of the discharge of this condition as well. So as I say, that is now at a finalised stage, and for that reason, we're now recommending the approval of this discharge of condition. Thank you.
Colleagues, do we have any questions for Barry? Speak up if you have. No questions? Okay, well, in that case, are we happy to agree the recommendations? Yeah, I can't, the screen's going, so I can't see if I'm getting thumbs up or not. Yeah, I can see now. Yeah, okay. So are we happy to record that? I'm getting loads of thumbs up here. Are we happy to record that as a decision? No one otherwise minded? Speak up if you are. Okay then, we'll accept the recommendations. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is a conclusion report on enforcement notice, restoration and safety works at Chalmerston Surface Mine Complex, Penny, Venny and Chalmerston North, Forestry Land, Scotland. And it's on pages 131 to 154 in your papers. And Barry, I take it this is you again, friend.
It is, yeah.
Okay, just want to go through first for us.
Thanks again, Chair. Again, this one should be reasonably straightforward. Yeah, so this the next two reports actually deal with the conclusion of safety and restoration works at the Chalmerston Opencast Coal Complex. This one is in relation to the Penny, Veney and Chalmerston North area, which is in ownership of Forestry Land Scotland. The works were undertaken and secured through an enforcement notice and undertaken by Mines Restoration Limited under a restoration service agreement. An enforcement notice was served in March 2021. Works were primarily limited to safety works to enable the site to be removed from quarry regulations, and this is because the North Kyle wind farm is proposed in this area, and it would not have been an effective use of the bond monies available to carry out works which may have then been affected by the wind farm. So running through some of the photos, first of all, this just shows the location of the area we're talking about. So the area with the star on it is the Forestry Land Scotland land at Penny Veney in Chalmerston North. And this is a plan showing the areas that were worked on. So there are 5 areas in total, as you can see here. To the bottom right-hand side of the screen is the B741, which runs between Dunmelliton and Newcumnock, just for orientation purposes. And Dunmelliton is just off the screen, just to the bottom of it there. This is the area of water of coil, which is area 1. And there's significant reduction in size of the water body, removal of steep edge on the northern side, fencing around the edge of the water body and high walls. This is actually a before photo, and this is after, so you can see the difference in the size of the water body. Area 2, fencing with the scope of work being reduced due to a further potential overlap with the wind farm works, so really just fencing being undertaken in this area here. And I see the title is actually covered by this, unfortunately. This is relating to area 3, regrading here reduced due to the wind farm overlap, and all fencing has been erected. So this is before photo and after photo. And moving on to area 3, this is safety fencing around a peat trap and the creation of an informal footpath to keep walkers away from the peat trap. That's what works have gone on in this area. Unfortunately, I can't see the title to the photo, so it's quite difficult to sort of link the two up. Yeah. In this area, This is area 5. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up with the photos now because I can't actually see the title. Oh, there we go. Area 4, area 4. Yeah, so area 4 is where we have safety fencing around a peat trap and the creation of an informal footpath. And area 5 is to the north of the void. An extensive area has been regraded which slopes towards the void. So that's Ben Beer, which is quite a prominent landmark. Forestry Land Scotland access, which has been created as well in that area. And the completion of works there that you can see it's all been evened out quite nicely. Works have been carried out using a combination of East Ayrshire Council and Forestry Land Scotland bond monies to a value of around £630,000. Remaining bond monies amounting to around £3.6 million will be used in combination with a contribution from developers of the North Kyle Wind Farm to carry out further more substantial restoration works once the wind farm construction is substantially complete in this area. So members are just asked to note the content of this report and note that the enforcement notice can now be withdrawn, and at this stage the Section 75 obligations which relate to this part of the site cannot yet be discharged because there are more restoration works to take place. So that really concludes on that part.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions, please, for clarification? No, we're not seeing anybody. Okay then, well, in that case, we are asked to note the report. So are we happy to note the report, peeps? Just thumbs up, yep, thank you. Nobody's any otherwise minded? Okay, thank you, we note the report, thank you. Are you up again?
Yep.
Okay, please. So last one for today is the conclusion report on restoration and safety works is at the Chamerston open cast coal mine near Dalmellington. Off you go, Vary. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the other part of the Chamerston complex and relates to land which is owned and operated or has been restored by Hargreaves Limited. So this is the Chamerston site, which is, I'll just actually show the slides in fact so you can see where it is. Yeah, so this again, if we look at this open cast mapping, this is area 24 and 33, I think, that we're talking about now. And this report does also deal with area 29, which is known as Ben Bain, and I'll come on to that later. Sorry, that actually shouldn't be there. That's in relation to the previous plan, but we'll just ignore that one. Okay. So restoration works have been undertaken in accordance with a method statement which was presented to the Planning Committee in October 2015. The works have been undertaken without the need to serve an enforcement notice on Hargreaves, and the method statement was later varied to increase the number of areas of work from 7 to 12 following the recommendations of a geotechnical specialist. And the works have been undertaken by Hargreaves with no expense to the council. The works do mainly relate to safety and environmental mitigation works, and along with some regrading as well. So looking at the slides, this is area, yep, there we go. Area number 1, where no work is actually taking place here because the area has regenerated, the vegetation is regenerated quite well itself anyway, and there are no particular works needed for safety reasons. Area 2 is a barrel wash area and an overburden tip and void containing, a barrier has been erected to prohibit access in this area, and area of humps and hollows, which you can see here, has been regraded and safety fencing erected. So that's kind of before and after. And another view. And another. Sorry, there are quite a lot of slides, so I'll just try and run through them fairly quickly. Moving on to Area 3, there have been mainly the regrading of uneven ground in this area. You can see this card is coal here, and then that's been removed in this photograph. Area 4, regrading operations only undertaken on the western extent of the overburden tip. Other areas were left due to natural regeneration. So again, it's before and after. Area 5B is a peat cell. No works have been undertaken following agreement with the geotechnical specialist. And Area 6 is the Tongue Glen culvert, which has been extended and debris cleared from both ends. It's a culvert there, sorry. Area 7 was primarily regrading of the uneven surface. That's it complete. And Area 8, additional work where trees have been cut back and debris cleared from the watercourse. And Area 9 are water treatment ponds where additional work has been carried out to where a breakout of water was identified, which has been dug away and replaced with clay to form a seal. And Area 10 is an area of additional work where the erection of a barrier fencing to prevent access to the Barrow Wash Pond and fencing as well, which has been erected. Area 11, additional work where concrete weir is removed and embankment reshaped to prevent overtopping, and that's an outlet there as well. And the last one, Area 12, which has comprised excavation and barrier fencing to prevent access, and this was also additional work. And also, in addition to what was in the method statement, these tyres, which we call legacy tyres, have now been removed from the site. Moving on to Ben Bain, this is included in this report. As I showed previously on the open cast mapping, this is shown as Area 29 and unrestored land. We've asked Dalgleish to provide advice on this area of land, Dalgleish Associates being our independent compliance monitors. Information on the site was difficult to find, basically because it was operations took place back in the 1970s and 80s by the National Coal Board, so there was no planning application as such. So we think that it has actually been included in the mapping potentially as a mistake, and possibly with some confusion with Ben Bain Remainder, which was an area within the adjacent Chalmerston complex, which is to the left-hand side of this area. So the area is now actually well-established forestry, given the amount of time that's between it being coaled and restored. So we now recommend that that area is removed from the open cast coal mapping and shown as being restored. And this is it here. You can see that it's well-established forestry and fits in very well with the landscape around. And another. So basically, just to conclude, the Hargreaves works at Chalmerston the recommendation is to note that works are being completed in accordance with the method statement as amended, with no need to serve an enforcement notice, and that the Section 75 agreements relating to this area can now proceed to be discharged. And with regard to the Ben Bain area, the recommendation is to note that this area can be changed from unrestored to restored on the open cast coal mapping. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Do we have any questions for Barry? No questions? No. Okay, then, in that case, we're asked to note the 4 bullet points. Are we so minded? Are we happy to do that? Can I get thumbs up if we are? Thank you very much. Is anybody otherwise minded? Okay then, thank you very much. We will note that. So I think that's the conclusion then. We've been through our agenda. We'll be nearly 3 hours at it, folks. So thank you all very much for your indulgence, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.